Ambassador Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire adjusted his ceremonial robes as he entered the Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Federation. The massive hall buzzed with conversations in dozens of alien tongues, creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and harmonic tones that would have been impossible for most species to understand. But not for humans. Dr. Sarah Chun sat quietly in the corner designated for the newest member species, her translation device unnecessary as her enhanced mind processed each conversation simultaneously. She had volunteered for the Neural Enhancement Program specifically for this assignment, knowing that representing humanity at the Federation required more than just diplomatic skills. The primates think they belong here, hissed Counselor Vextai, his reptilian features twisted in disgust. 300 years of space travel, and they believe themselves equal to civilizations that have existed for millennia. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. This was nothing new. For the past 6 months since humanity's admission to the Federation, they had endured constant ridicule and dismissal from the established powers. The Federation operated on a strict hierarchy based on technological advancement, military strength, and what they called evolutionary superiority. Humans ranked dead last in all categories. The Zephyrians had ruled space for over 10,000 years, their crystalline ships capable of faster-than-light travel that made human vessels look like ancient steam engines. The Krillian hive possessed collective intelligence that solved problems in minutes that would take human scientists decades. The Thexmori had evolved past the need for physical bodies, existing as pure energy beings who viewed biological life as primitive. Order. Order. The voice of High Chancellor Mordun resonated through the chamber. The ancient being's form shifted constantly between states of matter, a display of power that never failed to intimidate lesser species. We gather today to address the ongoing territorial disputes in the Outer Rim sectors. Sarah straightened in her seat. The Outer Rim included several systems that humanity had been eyeing for colonization. With Earth's population nearing 15 billion and resources stretched thin despite advances in sustainability technology, finding new worlds wasn't just an opportunity, it was a necessity. The Sector 7 dispute involves claims by 3 species, Mordun continued. The Valdris Consortium seeks mining rights to the asteroid fields. The Gorlan Collective requires the gas giants for their breeding cycles. And his voice dripped with what could only be described as amusement. The humans desire the terrestrial worlds for their expansion needs. Laughter rippled through the chamber. Not polite diplomatic chuckling, but genuine mirth at the absurdity of humanity's request. Counselor Yirlthak of the Valdris Consortium stood, his 4 arms spread wide in a gesture of dismissal. Surely we need not waste the Council's time with such frivolous claims. The humans lack both the technology and the strength to maintain colonies at such distances from their homeworld. Perhaps we should assign them a few asteroids to practice on first? More laughter. Sarah felt her hands clench beneath the table. I must agree, added Queen Mind Zekti of the Krillian hive, her voice emanating from the crystalline pod that housed her immense brain. Our projections indicate that human colonies in Sector 7 would fail within 2 standard years. The transportation costs alone would bankrupt their primitive economy. We would essentially be sending them to die for our entertainment. The humans are welcome to submit formal proposals like any species, High Chancellor Mordun said, his tone making it clear this was merely a formality. However, priority will be given to civilizations capable of actually utilizing these resources effectively. Sarah rose slowly from her seat. The chamber fell silent, not out of respect, but out of curiosity. It was rare for representatives of lower-tier species to speak during major council sessions. Honored Chancellor, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. Humanity formally requests consideration for colonization rights to the terrestrial worlds in Sector 7. We have prepared detailed proposals for sustainable development that would benefit not just humanity, but the entire Federation through increased trade and resource sharing. Proposals. Counselor Vextai's forked tongue flicked out in the reptilian equivalent of spitting. What could your species possibly offer us? Your fastest ships require months to travel distances we cover in days. Your weapons couldn't pierce the shields of our mining vessels. Your entire civilization produces less energy in a year than my homeworld generates in an hour. We offer determination, Sarah said quietly, and innovation born from necessity. Humans have survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and natural disasters that would have ended weaker species. We've turned barren deserts into gardens and hostile environments into homes. What we lack in advanced technology, we make up for in adaptability and resourcefulness. The chamber erupted in what Sarah was beginning to recognize as the galactic equivalent of mockery. Clicks, screeches, harmonic dissonance. Every species had their own way of expressing derision, and they were all expressing it now. Determination, wheezed Administrator Thexval, his energy form flickering with what might have been laughter. How wonderfully primitive. Next you'll suggest that heart and courage are meaningful factors in galactic politics. The Federation operates on logic and capability, Queen Mind Zekti stated with finality. Emotional appeals are the refuge of species that lack substantive contributions. Perhaps humanity should focus on developing actual technology before attempting to claim territory alongside their betters. High Chancellor Mordun raised an appendage that might have been a hand. The human request is noted and will be considered alongside all other proposals. However, I think we can all agree that realistic assessment of capabilities is crucial. The Federation cannot risk valuable resources on species that lack the means to utilize them effectively. Sarah remained standing. Something was building inside her chest, a pressure that felt like a fusion reactor reaching critical mass. She had endured 6 months of this. 6 months of condescension, dismissal, and barely concealed contempt. 6 months of watching her species be treated like children begging for scraps at the adults' table. With respect, Chancellor, she said, her voice carefully controlled. I believe the Federation may be underestimating human capabilities. Oh, Councillor Vextie's scaled head tilted. And what, pray tell, have we overlooked? Your charming ability to pollute your own atmosphere? Your talent for killing each other over imaginary territorial lines? Perhaps your gift for creating weapons of mass destruction while simultaneously claiming to be a peaceful species. The pressure in Sarah's chest grew stronger. Around her, she could sense the growing excitement of the other delegates. This was entertainment for them, watching the primitive human make a fool of herself before the assembled might of galactic civilization. We've observed your species for centuries, continued Vextai, clearly enjoying himself. Your entire history is a catalog of violence, ignorance, and self-destruction. You've barely managed to achieve basic space flight, and already you think yourselves worthy of galactic territory. The Federation has protocols for dealing with species like yours. We call them containment procedures. Sarah's vision seemed to narrow. The word containment hit her like a physical blow. She thought of Earth, crowded and struggling. She thought of the thousands of human families hoping for new worlds, new opportunities, new hope for their children. She thought of humanity's dreams of joining the galactic community as equals, not as pets or zoo animals. You speak of our history, she said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You mock our struggles and our failures. You see weakness where we see survival. You see primitiveness where we see potential. Potential, laughed Administrator Thexval. The cry of every failed species. We have potential. We just need time. We just need resources. Meanwhile, actual civilizations achieve actual results. You want to know what you've overlooked about humanity? Sarah continued, ignoring the laughter. You've overlooked that every single challenge you've mentioned, every single failure you've cataloged, every single weakness you've identified, we survived them all. The laughter was dying down now. Something in Sarah's tone was beginning to penetrate the general mood of amusement. You survived because you were isolated, Queen Mind Zekti pointed out. Survival against natural disasters, and your own incompetence hardly qualifies as galactic-level achievement. You're right, Sarah said, nodding slowly. We were isolated. For our entire history, we had no one to rely on but ourselves. No advanced allies to provide technology. No galactic peacekeepers to prevent our wars. No federation to mediate our disputes or provide guidance. Just us, alone on a single world, with nothing but our own ingenuity and determination to see us through. She looked around the chamber, meeting the alien gazes of beings who had never known true hardship. And, despite that, despite having no help, no guidance, no advanced technology handed down from elder civilizations, we made it here. We built ships that can cross the void between stars. We created weapons that can crack planets. We developed medicine that can extend life and technology that can reshape matter itself. We did all of that starting from caves and stone tools, with no one to help us but ourselves. The chamber had grown quiet. Sarah could feel something shifting in the atmosphere, a subtle change in attention. But, more importantly, she continued, her voice growing stronger. We did something that apparently none of your advanced civilizations has managed to do. We looked at a universe full of hostile environments, predatory species, and impossible challenges, and we decided to keep going anyway. Not because we knew we would succeed, but because stopping wasn't an option. A pretty speech, Counselor Vextai sneered, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. But speeches don't colonize worlds or build civilizations. No, Sarah agreed. But the species that gave those speeches do. She reached into her diplomatic pouch and withdrew a small device, a standard Federation data pad that she had modified with human technology. The chamber's security systems immediately detected the unauthorized modifications, but Sarah activated it before anyone could react. The holographic display showed a star map of the local galactic region, with dozens of systems marked in various colors. Red markers indicated Federation territories. Blue showed neutral or unclaimed space. And, scattered throughout, in brilliant white, were smaller markers that made several delegates lean forward in surprise. Those white markers represent human presence, Sarah said calmly. Not colonies. Not official territorial claims. Just humans who decided that waiting for Federation permission was taking too long. Gasps echoed through the chamber. The white markers weren't just in unclaimed space. They were in systems that the Federation had deemed too dangerous, too remote, or too resource-poor to bother with. Impossible, breathed Queen Mind Zekti. Our sensors would have detected major colonization efforts. Major efforts, yes, Sarah agreed. But humans don't need major efforts. We don't require massive terraforming operations or extensive support networks. A few hundred volunteers with basic equipment can establish a viable settlement in environments that your species wouldn't consider habitable without full atmospheric processors and artificial gravity generators. She manipulated the display, zooming in on one of the white markers. This is New Tucson, established 8 months ago on a world your surveys classified as marginally habitable. Gravity is 1.3 Earth standard. Atmosphere is breathable, but thin. Average temperature is 15 degrees below human comfort zones. Your experts calculated that making this world livable would require an investment of approximately 50 billion Federation credits and 3 years of terraforming. The display showed aerial footage of a thriving settlement surrounded by agricultural domes and mining operations. The actual cost was about 12 million human dollars, and the willingness of 350 volunteers to spend their first winter in prefabricated shelters while they built permanent structures from local materials. The settlement is now self-sufficient and actually showing a profit from rare earth mining operations. Counselor Uralthax for arms were trembling. Those territories fall under Federation jurisdiction. You had no right. We had every right, Sarah interrupted, her composure beginning to crack. Those systems were classified as worthless by Federation standards. No strategic value. No rare resources worth the extraction costs. No potential for major civilizations. Perfect for a species that your experts apparently consider too primitive to matter. She changed the display again, showing another marker. This is Armstrong Station, built inside an asteroid field that your surveys warned would be impossible to navigate safely. Turns out that when you're not trying to push kilometer-long crystal ships through debris fields, it's actually quite manageable. Especially when your pilots have been training their entire lives to handle vehicles in chaotic environments. More gasps. More worried conversations in alien tongues. And this, Sarah continued, highlighting a marker deep in what the Federation considered hostile territory, is Horizon Base. established on a world in the middle of a radiation storm that your scientists said would kill any biological life within hours. That's impossible. Administrator Thexval's energy form was fluctuating wildly. Our calculations clearly showed lethal radiation levels. Your calculations were correct, Sarah confirmed, for species that had never been exposed to radiation before. But humans have been dealing with radiation since we discovered nuclear physics. We know how to shield against it, how to treat exposure, and how to live in environments that would cook most galactic species. What you saw as a death trap, we saw as excellent protection from pirates and hostile forces. High Chancellor Mordun's form had solidified into something resembling concern. You're telling this council that humanity has been conducting unauthorized expansion throughout Federation space. I'm telling this council, Sarah said, her voice rising for the first time, that humanity doesn't need your permission to survive. We've been doing it for millennia without your help, and we'll keep doing it whether you approve or not. The only question is whether you want us as partners or as neighbors you pretend don't exist. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates were shouting in dozens of languages, demanding explanations, threatening sanctions, calling for immediate military response to human violations of Federation space. But Sarah wasn't finished. You want to know what else you've overlooked about humanity? She shouted over the noise. You've overlooked that we're really good at making friends with people who treat us with respect, and absolutely terrible at dealing with people who try to push us around. The shouting died down as her words carried through the chamber. Every single one of those settlements I showed you was established with the help of local species that the Federation either ignored or actively oppressed. Turns out there are a lot of civilizations out there who got tired of being told they weren't advanced enough to matter. And humans are really good at working with underdogs. She manipulated the display one more time, showing communication networks linking the human settlements with dozens of previously unknown or dismissed species. You see primitive determination. They see stubborn allies who don't give up when things get difficult. You see technological limitations. They see creative problem-solving that doesn't require billion-credit budgets. You see a species that doesn't know its place. They see a species that's willing to stand up and say that maybe the current system isn't working for everyone. Queen Mind Zekti's voice carried a note of something that might have been fear. Are you threatening the Federation? Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. Threatening you? With what? You've spent the last 6 months explaining how primitive and helpless we are. How could we possibly threaten civilizations that have ruled the galaxy for millennia? She looked around the chamber, meeting as many alien gazes as she could. But here's something that might interest you. 3 days ago, the Korthak Empire, you know, the ones who've been raiding Federation shipping lanes for the past decade. They tried to attack Horizon Base. The chamber went dead silent. Apparently, they thought a human settlement would be easy prey. Soft targets with primitive weapons and no real defenses. Sarah's smile was sharp as a knife. They sent 12 heavy cruisers and about 4,000 troops. She paused, letting the tension build. Would you like to guess how many made it home? The silence in the chamber stretched until it became almost physical, pressing down on the assembled delegates like the weight of vacuum itself. Sarah Chun stood perfectly still, her question hanging in the air like a weapon waiting to detonate. High Chancellor Mordun was the first to break. How many? He asked, his constantly shifting form stabilizing into something that suggested intense focus. None. The word hit the chamber like a shock wave. Several delegates actually recoiled in their seats. Impossible, Councillor Vextai hissed. The Korthak Empire has been raiding Federation space for a decade. Their ships are equipped with military-grade shields and weapons. Your primitive vessels couldn't possibly. You're right, Sarah interrupted. Our ships couldn't have done it. The Korthak cruisers would have obliterated our little patrol boats without breaking formation. She activated her modified data pad again, and the holographic display showed sensor readings from the Horizon Base incident. The energy signatures were unlike anything in Federation databases. Fortunately, we didn't use ships. The display showed the asteroid field around Horizon Base, seemingly empty except for the human settlement built into the largest rock. Then, as the Korthak fleet approached, the field itself seemed to come alive. You see, when humans looked at that asteroid field, we didn't just see a place to hide a base. We saw the largest minefield in galactic history, just waiting for someone to activate it. The recording showed what happened next. As the Korthak cruisers moved into attack formation, dozens of asteroids throughout the field suddenly lit up with thruster fire. But they weren't moving randomly. They were moving with purpose, with coordination, with deadly precision. Every asteroid larger than 50 meters had been hollowed out and fitted with guidance systems and thruster packages. Some carried kinetic warheads. Others were loaded with our own special addition to galactic warfare, nuclear charges. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Nuclear weapons were considered obsolete by galactic standards, too crude and unpredictable for civilized warfare. The Korthak ships detected the incoming asteroids, of course, Sarah continued, her voice matter of fact. Their point defense systems began engaging targets immediately. Very impressive technology, really. They managed to destroy about 60% of the incoming rocks. The holographic display showed the Korthak fleet's defensive fire lighting up space like a deadly fireworks display. Asteroids exploded in brilliant flashes as the cruiser's weapons found their marks. Unfortunately for them, destroying a nuclear warhead in space doesn't make it safe. It just makes it different. The display showed the moment when the first asteroid exploded under defensive fire. Instead of simply breaking apart, it released an expanding sphere of superheated plasma and electromagnetic radiation. The Korthak ship that had destroyed it immediately went dark as its systems overloaded. Nuclear weapons in space don't create mushroom clouds, Sarah explained to the stunned delegates. They create electromagnetic pulses that can fry electronics from hundreds of kilometers away. And when you're dealing with asteroids that mass several thousand tons, the warheads can be quite large indeed. The battle recording showed ship after ship going dead as their defensive fire triggered the very weapons they were trying to stop. Those that survived the EMP bursts found themselves facing kinetic impactors moving at speeds that made conventional weapons look like thrown rocks. The entire engagement lasted 14 minutes, Sarah said. When it was over, 12 Korthak heavy cruisers had been reduced to debris and radiation. Approximately 4,000 of the galaxy's most feared pirates had been eliminated without a single human casualty. She closed the display and looked around the chamber. The Korthak Empire filed a formal complaint with the Federation Council, claiming that the use of nuclear weapons violated galactic warfare conventions. Laughter bubbled up from Sarah's throat, but it wasn't pleasant. Apparently, they expected sympathy for attacking a civilian settlement and getting their fleets obliterated by primitive weapons. Councillor Yerulthak's forearms were shaking. This is madness. Nuclear weapons are barbaric, uncivilized. The radiation alone could contaminate entire systems. The radiation dissipated within hours, Sarah replied calmly. Space is quite good at absorbing and dispersing atomic byproducts, unlike planetary atmospheres, which tend to hold onto contamination for decades. We learned that lesson the hard way, back when we were still figuring out nuclear physics without anyone to guide us. Queen Mind Zekti's crystalline pod was flickering with agitation. You cannot seriously be defending the use of such crude weapons against civilized opponents. Civilized? Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried throughout the vast chamber. The Korthak Empire practices slavery. They've depopulated 17 worlds in the past decade. Their idea of civilized warfare involves taking prisoners specifically so they can torture them for information before selling them at auction. She looked directly at the Krillian Queen Mind. But, please, tell me more about how we should have politely asked them to stop murdering our colonists. The point, Administrator Thexval interjected, his energy form crackling with what might have been indignation, is that there are established protocols for dealing with piracy. The Federation maintains peacekeeping forces specifically to the Federation, Sarah interrupted, has been aware of Korthak raids for 10 years. In that time, how many pirate ships have been captured or destroyed by official peacekeeping forces? The silence stretched. I'll answer that, Sarah continued. According to Federation records, peacekeeping forces have successfully interdicted exactly 4 Korthak vessels in the past decade. Meanwhile, the pirates have destroyed or captured over 300 civilian ships and killed an estimated 50,000 beings. She pulled up another display, this one showing Federation military deployment patterns. Would you like to know why the peacekeeping response has been so ineffective? Because the Federation deploys forces based on the political importance of the target areas. Core worlds get heavy protection. Mid-tier systems get regular patrols. Outer Rim territories, where most of the raids occur, get visited maybe once every 6 months. High Chancellor Mordun's form shifted uncomfortably. Resource allocation is based on strategic necessity and population density. It would be inefficient to protect the beings who live in those systems. Sarah's composure was starting to crack again. The miners who extract the raw materials that power your crystal ships? The agricultural worlds that feed your populations? The research stations that discover new technologies for your use? Those settlements chose to establish themselves in dangerous areas, Counselor Vextai said defensively. They understood the risks when they moved beyond the protection of civilized space. Civilized space, Sarah repeated slowly. Is that what you call the arbitrary boundary where Federation protection stops? Because I have to tell you, the beings living just outside that boundary have a different name for it. She activated her data pad again, showing communication intercepts from the human settlement networks. They call it the abandonment line, the place where advanced civilizations decide that certain lives just aren't worth protecting. The intercepted messages played through the chamber's translation systems. Desperate calls for help from worlds under attack. Pleas for evacuation assistance. Final transmissions from settlements being overrun by pirates or hostile forces. All of them addressed to Federation peacekeeping forces. All of them unanswered. Humanity has been in your Federation for exactly 6 months, and for days, Sarah said, her voice growing harder with each word. In that time, we've received 47 distress calls from settlements in our area of operations. 47 requests for help from beings that your advanced civilizations decided weren't worth saving. You had no authority to respond to those calls, Queen Mind Zekti stated firmly. Peacekeeping operations require Federation approval and coordination. Unauthorized military action violates. Fuck your authorization. The words hit the chamber like a physical slap. Several delegates actually jumped in their seats. In the entire history of the Federation Council, no representative had ever used such crude language in formal session. Sarah was past caring about diplomatic protocol. 47 calls for help, she repeated. Slavers attacking a mining colony on Zirian Prime. Pirates raiding agricultural shipments from the Theshan system. A plague outbreak on Korvax 7 that could have been contained with basic medical supplies. 47 chances for your advanced civilizations to prove that Federation membership actually means something. She looked around the chamber, meeting the shocked gazes of beings who had never been spoken to this way. And you did nothing. You debated resource allocation and strategic priorities while people died. You held committee meetings about proper procedures while pirates sold children into slavery. You discussed jurisdictional authority while entire settlements burned. We have protocols. Administrator Thexval's energy form was fluctuating wildly. Proper procedures exist to prevent chaos and ensure coordinated response. Without structure, 47 settlements are still alive, Sarah snapped. Without your protocols, thousands of beings who were marked for death or slavery are now free. Without your proper procedures, the Korthak Empire just learned that there are consequences for attacking civilians. She pulled up a new display, showing the locations where human forces had responded to distress calls. Green markers indicated successful rescues. Blue showed ongoing protection details. Red marked settlements that had been lost before help could arrive. We saved 38 out of 47, Sarah said quietly. 9 settlements were overrun before we could respond. We held memorial services for the beings we couldn't save. Do you want to know how many memorial services the Federation has held for piracy victims in the past decade? The silence was deafening. The answer is 0. Because you don't hold memorials for people whose deaths were strategically acceptable losses. Counselor Vextai was on his feet, his scaled hide flushed with anger. How dare you lecture this council about acceptable losses? Your species spent centuries slaughtering each other over territorial disputes. You have no moral authority to. You're absolutely right, Sarah agreed, her voice cutting through his rant like a blade. We spent centuries killing each other. We made terrible mistakes. We committed atrocities that still haunt our history. We were violent, ignorant, and often barbaric. She paused, letting the admission hang in the air. But we learned from those mistakes. We grew beyond our worst instincts. We developed concepts like justice, mercy, and the protection of the innocent. And, most importantly, we never forgot what it felt like to be helpless. Her voice rose again, carrying a passion that made several delegates lean back in their seats. When we hear a distress call, we don't calculate the strategic value of responding. We don't debate the political implications or the resource costs. We remember what it was like when no one was coming to save us. And we make damn sure that no one else has to feel that abandoned. Emotional decision-making is the hallmark of primitive species, Queen Mind Zekti stated coldly. Advanced civilizations operate on logic and efficiency. Personal feelings cannot be allowed to override strategic necessity. Sarah stared at the crystalline pod for a long moment. Is that what you tell yourselves? That abandoning people to die is logical? That watching civilizations burn is efficient? That letting pirates run wild in the outer systems is strategic necessity? She activated her data pad one more time, and the display showed a detailed analysis of Federation resource allocation over the past decade. Your logical policies have resulted in the loss of 17 populated worlds, the displacement of over 2 million beings, and the complete destabilization of 12 star systems. Meanwhile, the resources you've saved by not protecting the outer territories, they've been spent on ceremonial fleets, luxury diplomatic facilities, and research projects that primarily benefit core world populations. The analysis broke down exactly how much the Federation spent on non-essential items compared to frontier protection. The numbers were staggering. You've spent more money on decorative lighting for this chamber than you have on anti-piracy operations in the entire Outer Rim, Sarah continued. You've allocated more resources to studying the mating habits of extinct species than to protecting living settlements from active threats. High Chancellor Mordun's form was shifting rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. Those research projects serve the greater good of all Federation species. Scientific advancement benefits everyone, not just, really? Sarah interrupted. Because I'm looking at the publication records, and it seems like 96% of Federation research benefits are restricted to core world species. The beings living in the outer territories, the ones you're too logical to protect, they don't get access to your scientific advancements. They're not advanced enough to matter. She closed the data pad and looked around the chamber one more time. So here's what's going to happen, she said, her voice calm again, but carrying an edge that made even the most powerful delegates pay attention. Humanity is formally withdrawing our request for territorial allocation in Sector 7. Confused murmurs rippled through the chamber. Instead, we're announcing the formation of the Frontier Protection Alliance. Membership is open to any species that believes civilian settlements shouldn't be left to die for the sake of strategic efficiency. Any civilization that thinks distress calls should be answered, not filed away in bureaucratic committees. You cannot form military alliances without Federation approval. Councillor Yerlthak protested. Unauthorized coalitions violate the fundamental structure of galactic governance. The fundamental structure of galactic governance, Sarah replied. Just watch 12 Korthak heavy cruisers get turned into scrap metal by a species you consider too primitive to take seriously. Maybe it's time to reconsider what works and what doesn't. She gathered her materials and prepared to leave. The Alliance will begin operations immediately, she announced. Our first priority is establishing rapid response capabilities throughout the outer territories. Our second priority is hunting down the remaining Korthak fleets before they can relocate their operations. This is madness. Administrator Thexval's energy form was crackling violently. You're talking about vigilante operations. Unauthorized military action. The Federation cannot allow. The Federation, Sarah said, turning back to face the chamber, can do whatever it wants. You can file formal protests. You can impose sanctions. You can even declare us enemies of galactic civilization if that makes you feel better. She smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. But before you do any of that, you might want to ask yourselves one simple question. If a species you consider hopelessly primitive just eliminated the most successful pirate fleet in the galaxy, what do you think will do to anyone who tries to stop us from protecting innocent people? 6 months later, The same council chamber felt like a different universe entirely. The ornate decorations remained unchanged. The massive holographic displays still projected their elaborate star maps, and the same delegates occupied the same seats. But everything else had shifted in ways that defied measurement. High Chancellor Mordun's constantly shifting form had stabilized into what could only be described as nervous anxiety. Around him, the most powerful beings in the galaxy sat in uncomfortable silence, waiting for a report that none of them wanted to hear. Intelligence Summary, Admiral Crestalk, Mordun said finally. The Valdris Admiral rose slowly, his forearms trembling as he accessed his data systems. Crestalk had been considered one of the finest military minds in Federation space, architect of countless successful campaigns against rebel systems and primitive uprisings. Today, he looked like a being who had seen his entire worldview collapse. The situation in the Outer Territories has changed dramatically, he began, his voice carefully controlled. The human-led Frontier Protection Alliance now controls effective military authority over approximately 40% of the galaxy's inhabitable systems. Gasps echoed through the chamber. 40% was more territory than any single Federation member had ever controlled. That's impossible, Councillor Vextai hissed. Our intelligence networks would have detected massive military buildups. Large-scale fleet deployments cannot be hidden from. There have been no large-scale fleet deployments, Admiral Crestalk interrupted. That's what makes this situation so unprecedented. The Alliance operates using tactics and strategies that our military doctrine cannot effectively counter. He activated his own displays, showing star maps marked with symbols that had become disturbingly familiar to Federation intelligence analysts. Green zones indicated Alliance-protected territories. Red zones marked areas where pirate activity had been completely eliminated. Blue zones showed systems that had voluntarily joined the Alliance protection network. The map was dominated by green and blue. The Alliance operates on a principle they call distributed defense, Crestalk continued. Instead of maintaining large fleets that can be tracked and targeted, they've established small response teams throughout the Outer Territories. Each team consists of no more than 50 humans and whatever local allies they've recruited. 50 humans? Queen Mind Zekti's crystalline pod flickered with disbelief. 50 primitive humans cannot secure an entire star system. Under normal circumstances, that would be correct, the Admiral agreed. However, the Alliance teams don't operate under normal circumstances. They've weaponized concepts that our military strategists never considered relevant to galactic warfare. He changed the display, showing tactical analyses of Alliance operations. The data was disturbing in its implications. Alliance teams integrate completely with local populations, Crestalk explained. They don't establish separate military bases or maintain distinct command structures. Instead, they train local defense forces, upgrade existing infrastructure, and create self-sustaining security networks that can operate independently. Guerrilla tactics, Administrator Thexval said dismissively. Primitive insurgency methods that cannot stand against organized military force. That was our initial assessment, Admiral Crestalk admitted. We deployed the 7th Fleet to demonstrate Federation authority in the Korvax system, where Alliance forces had eliminated a syndicate slavery operation. The fleet consisted of 43 capital ships and approximately 15,000 troops. The chamber fell silent. The 7th Fleet was one of the Federation's premier military formations, capable of conquering entire civilizations. The engagement lasted 6 hours, Crestalk continued. When it was over, 31 Federation vessels had been destroyed or captured. Over 10,000 troops were dead or missing. The surviving ships retreated in complete disorder. Impossible. Councillor Uralthax for arms were gesturing wildly. The 7th Fleet has shields that can withstand stellar radiation. Weapons that can crack planetary crusts. How could 50 humans? The humans didn't defeat the 7th Fleet, Admiral Crestalk said quietly. The 7th Fleet was defeated by the Korvax Defense Consortium, a local militia that the Alliance had trained and equipped with weapons based on human military doctrine. He pulled up battle recordings that made several delegates cover their optical sensors. The Korvakians used modified mining equipment to deliver nuclear warheads directly through our shield systems. Cargo haulers equipped with human-designed stealth technology penetrated our formation and deployed kinetic impactors at point-blank range. Even civilian pleasure craft had been converted into guided missiles loaded with explosives. The entire local population had become a military force, he continued. Every ship, every station, every asteroid mining platform was a potential weapons system. Our targeting computers couldn't distinguish between legitimate targets and civilian infrastructure because there was no distinction. The Alliance had turned an entire star system into a weapon. High Chancellor Mordun's form was shifting rapidly. What about the syndicate operation that started this conflict? Surely the Federation's intervention was justified to prevent. The syndicate operation had been eliminated 3 days before our arrival. Admiral Krestok interrupted. The slavers, their ships, their processing facilities, and their entire command structure had been destroyed. The Alliance forces had already departed, leaving only the Korvakians to celebrate their freedom. Then, why did you engage local forces? Queen Mind Zekti demanded. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. Fleet Command determined that the Alliance training of local militias constituted an unauthorized military buildup that threatened Federation security. Orders were issued to disarm the Korvakian forces and establish a Federation peacekeeping presence to prevent future incidents. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The Federation had attacked beings who had just been freed from slavery, simply because those beings had been trained to defend themselves. The Korvakians interpreted our arrival as an attempt to re-establish their subjugation. Krestok continued. They responded accordingly. Councillor Vextai was on his feet. This is barbaric. Civilian populations cannot be allowed to possess military-grade weapons. The prohibition on arming primitive species exists to prevent exactly this kind of. The prohibition on arming primitive species, a new voice interrupted, exists to keep them helpless. Every head in the chamber turned toward the entrance, where Dr. Sarah Chun stood flanked by 2 beings that made the Federation delegates shift uncomfortably. To her right was Admiral Thekvor, former Federation Navy commander who had resigned his commission to join the Alliance. To her left stood Captain Rilnax of the Korvak Defense Consortium, her scaled hide still bearing scars from recent battles. Dr. Chun, High Chancellor Mordun said carefully, you were not invited to this session. No, Sarah agreed, walking calmly toward the center of the chamber. But 37 member species of the Frontier Protection Alliance were. They asked me to deliver their response to the Federation's recent diplomatic initiatives. She stopped in the exact spot where she had stood 6 months earlier, when she had been a lone human begging for territorial scraps. Now, she represented a military alliance that had fundamentally altered the balance of galactic power. First, she said, let me address Admiral Krestok's report. The 7th Fleet wasn't defeated by primitive guerrilla tactics. It was defeated by a population that refused to be victims. She activated her own datapad, showing tactical analyses that the Federation's intelligence services had missed entirely. The Korvakians didn't fight like insurgents hiding in caves and launching surprise attacks. They fought like citizens defending their homes with every resource at their disposal. When you told them to disarm, they heard an order to return to slavery. When you demanded surrender, they heard a command to submit to oppression. The Federation was attempting to restore order. Administrator Thexval protested. Civilized governance requires civilized governance. Captain Rilnax interrupted, speaking for the first time. Doesn't attack people for refusing to be defenseless. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had personally fought Federation forces. My people were slaves for 16 years, she continued. We watched our children sold at auction while the Federation debated proper procedures for intervention. We sent distress calls that went unanswered for over a decade. When the Alliance finally came, they didn't ask for territorial concessions or strategic considerations. They asked what we needed to be free. And when we told them we needed weapons and training to defend ourselves, Admiral Thekvor added, his gravelly voice carrying across the chamber. They provided both without conditions or restrictions. No political control, no military occupation, no demands for Federation compliance. Just the tools and knowledge necessary for self-defense. Queen Mind Zekti's crystalline pod was flickering with agitation. Self-defense. You attacked a Federation fleet. We defended ourselves against an invasion force, Captain Rilnax corrected. The 7th Fleet arrived in our system, demanded our surrender, and began target locking civilian installations when we refused to comply. We treated them exactly the same way we treated the syndicate slavers, as hostile forces attempting to subjugate our population. This is precisely why the prohibition on arming primitive species exists, Counselor Yerlthak declared. Without proper oversight, lesser civilizations cannot distinguish between legitimate authority and lesser civilizations? Sarah's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. Is that what you call people who refuse to submit to your authority? She looked around at the assembled delegates, these beings who had ruled the galaxy for millennia through superior technology and unquestioned dominance. 6 months ago, you laughed at humanity's request for territorial consideration. You mocked our primitive determination and emotional decision-making. You treated us like children begging for privileges we hadn't earned. Her voice grew stronger. Today, the Frontier Protection Alliance controls more territory than any single Federation member. We've eliminated 3 major pirate organizations, liberated dozens of slave systems, and established defense networks that have reduced outer territory casualty rates by 94%. You've destabilized the entire galactic order. Counselor Vextai hissed. Regional conflicts are escalating because inferior species think they can challenge legitimate authority. Pirates are arming themselves with stolen Alliance weapons. Entire systems are declaring independence based on your example. Good, Sarah said simply. The word hit the chamber like a thunderclap. Let me be very clear about something, Sarah continued. The Alliance isn't trying to maintain your galactic order. We're trying to replace it with something that actually works. She activated her data pad again, showing comparative statistics that made the Federation's governance record look like a catalog of failures. In the 6 months since Alliance operations began, piracy in our protection zones has dropped by 87%. Civilian casualties from hostile action have decreased by 91%. Economic productivity in formerly oppressed systems has increased by an average of 340%. Meanwhile, she continued, Federation-controlled space has seen a 12% increase in pirate activity, primarily because criminal organizations have been forced out of Alliance territories. Your response times to emergency calls have actually gotten worse because you're diverting resources to monitor Alliance activities instead of protecting your own citizens. High Chancellor Mordun's form was shifting erratically. The Alliance operates outside established legal frameworks. Your methods cannot be sustained without proper coordination and oversight. Our methods, Admiral Thekfor said grimly, work because they don't require bureaucratic approval to save lives. He stepped forward, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber floor. I served in the Federation Navy for 47 years, he said. I followed orders that prioritized political stability over civilian safety. I enforced policies that treated some species as more worthy of protection than others. I watched good officers resign in disgust because they couldn't get authorization to respond to distress calls. His voice grew harsh with bitter memory. The Alliance gave me something the Federation never did, permission to act like a soldier instead of a bureaucrat. When pirates attack Alliance territory, we don't form committees to study the situation. We don't debate resource allocation or political implications. We respond with overwhelming force and eliminate the threat. Military force without political oversight is the definition of tyranny. Administrator Thexval's energy form was crackling with indignation. No, Captain Rilnax said quietly. Tyranny is watching your children sold into slavery while political authorities debate whether your suffering is strategically relevant. She looked directly at the administrator's flickering form. The Alliance doesn't govern the territories we protect. We don't impose laws or demand tribute or require political submission. We simply ensure that when someone calls for help, someone answers. When civilians are threatened, they have protection. When oppressors attack, they face consequences. That's vigilantism, Queen Mind Zekti stated firmly. Justice cannot be administered by unauthorized military forces operating outside legal frameworks. Justice, Sarah said, is what happens when the legal frameworks actually work. She pulled up a new display, showing crime statistics from Alliance territories compared to Federation space. Vigilantism suggests that we're operating outside the law to pursue personal vendettas or impose our will on others. But look at the results. Alliance territories have the lowest crime rates in the galaxy, the lowest civilian casualty rates, the lowest incidence of piracy, slavery, or systematic oppression. That's not justice, she continued. That's what justice looks like when it's actually enforced instead of debated. You're creating a precedent that will destroy galactic civilization. Counselor Vextai was practically shouting now. If every species can simply ignore Federation authority and form their own military alliances, there will be chaos. War. The collapse of everything we've built. Sarah stared at him for a long moment, then began to laugh. Not the bitter, angry laughter she had displayed 6 months earlier, but something that sounded almost genuinely amused. Destroy galactic civilization? She repeated. You mean the civilization where entire species are left to die because protecting them isn't cost-effective? Where pirates operate freely in territories you consider strategically unimportant? Where slavery continues to exist because eliminating it would require resources better spent on ceremonial fleets? Her laughter died away, replaced by something far more dangerous. If that's your definition of civilization, then, yes, we're going to destroy it. She looked around the chamber one final time, meeting the gaze of every delegate who had the courage to look back. The Alliance didn't come here to negotiate or compromise or beg for acceptance. We came here to deliver a message that every species in the galaxy needs to hear. She paused, letting the tension build to unbearable levels. The age of asking permission to defend the innocent is over. The era of debating whether civilian lives are worth protecting has ended. From this day forward, any force that preys upon the helpless, that profits from suffering, that considers some lives more valuable than others, that force will face the full military might of every species that has ever been abandoned by those who claim to protect them. This is a declaration of war against the Federation. High Chancellor Mordun's form was shifting so rapidly it was difficult to focus on. No, Sarah said calmly. This is a declaration that the Federation is no longer the only option. She turned and began walking toward the exit, followed by her companions. Wait, Admiral Krestok called out. What happens now? What should the Federation do? Sarah stopped and looked back over her shoulder. That's up to you, she said. You can continue governing the core worlds according to your traditional methods. You can maintain your ceremonial fleets and your bureaucratic protocols and your strategic priorities that leave the helpless to die. Or, she continued, you can ask yourself why 40% of the galaxy chose to follow a species you considered too primitive to matter. The chamber doors closed behind the Alliance delegation, leaving the Federation Council in stunned silence. Outside the chamber, the stars themselves seemed different. Across the galaxy, on thousands of worlds that had been written off as strategically unimportant, civilian populations looked up at those stars with something they had never felt before. Hope. And in the deepest reaches of space, where pirates and slavers had once operated with impunity, predators learned a new kind of fear. The fear that comes with the realization that their victims were no longer alone. The universe had changed. The strong could no longer prey upon the weak with impunity, because the weak were no longer weak. They were Alliance. And the Alliance remembered what it felt like to be helpless.